Hello and welcome back, everybody, to the latest edition here in our ongoing exploration of the 13 Moon System. As many of you know, we've been exploring this new or old, depending on how you look at it, way of navigating what we traditionally call 12 months, but here with 13 moons. In some videos, we've been looking at the Celtic tree calendar. We have a whole journey going on with the 13 moons in the QPW website. But myself and the sister Leslie, as many of you have been following us, have been looking at these 13 moons as we're cycling through them in the bigger journey in the tribe, but through the filter of the stellar nations, which is proving to be, as always, very, very illuminating. And as always, our sister is on point, I feel, with the nation that she has selected for this eighth moon of galactic integration. So come on down, Leslie. Who is it going to be for this eighth moon? And welcome to the
Have
show.
the arthropods.
Those arthropods. Well, we'll get into the arthropods in a minute, but Leslie, we're at an important moment, I feel, for everybody. As always, these shows seem to come, as we were talking about before we hit record,
Mhm.
absolutely synchronistically on point, which is why I personally have found it so interesting to see the nations that you have selected with the moons that we've already covered. They were inspired choices in those moments. Most of them were not necessarily what I would have pre-chosen, but on reflection, they were all perfect. And here we are at this galactic moon, which in the Mayan system is always about integration. But here we're integrating the galaxies of the universe inside of ourselves, which is pretty much part of becoming a multidimensional cosmic human. So I feel that we're on point, Leslie. Do you have anything to share about this moment that we're in, or anything before we dive into the world of the arthropods?
Well, I really think what we are integrating is the first seven steps. So the solidity of groundwork and grounding and foundations. But then we're saying, wait a minute, that's not all there is. We have to, there's another side. There's the invisible, there's the cosmic, the galactic. And we need to take what we've developed and learned, and we need to have a lot of faith and trust and move it into a bigger space. So
Mm.
that's pretty nebulous in a way, but it's not when we start looking at, I'm going to try to ground it a little with the arthropods, believe
Not
it or not.
not very easy, but yes, I totally agree. I mean, we've had other discussions in live calls and other videos that we've done about the nature of the first six tones coming to the rhythmic tone, which is about balance, and then we come to the tones that start to feel slightly beyond the physical body, the tone of integration, number seven. And we always say that the galactic tone in any wave spell is always the integration of the previous wave spell. So we're doing this in the wave spell of the World Bridger in 2026, as we cross over literally to today, this evening, into the energy of the storm wave spell, which seems very on point given the amount of storm energy that seems to be gathering in our world. And somehow the arthropods are involved in that. I know this from personal experience, as does Leslie, but I'm intrigued to see if we're going to be able to reach out to the higher notes of the arthropods with grandmother spider and all of that beautiful web of life, because that is also part of that world too. So, Leslie,
Well,
should we get into it?
yes, and very definitely. That's part
Yes.
of why the arthropods, because of the truth of the arthropods, and that's what we need to find in ourselves. So let
Aho. I love Grandmother Spider. She's been with me many years. She's quite the character and takes a little bit of integrating because spiders that are big can feel a little uncomfortable when they jump on you in
yes,
meditation.
we have a lot of history with spiders
We
too,
do. Isn't it weird
galactically.
how we have this weird fear of spiders and arthropods in general?
Well, there is a cosmic history where we shared a planet with them and they destroyed us. So,
That might do it.
okay. So, and they were as big as us or bigger. At this time, we made the deal if you come to Earth, you have to be smaller, but we
Right.
still quake. Okay. That's just from the stellar nations. But cosmic history is rich.
Yes, indeed.
All righty. So let's get going. We are in the 13 moon zodiac, and we have our totem animal for tone 8 is the hawk. And I was impelled. I kept thinking, watch like a hawk, watch like a hawk. What does that mean? Well, it's like perfect for this tone, actually, and for the arthropods. Um, but it means to observe someone or something with extreme, undivided attention and vigilance, typically to prevent mistakes, wrongdoing, or to ensure safety.
Mm, interesting. So
Okay.
we were actually recording this episode what is it now? Just about a week before this moon runs out, which the Hawk moon finishes on the 6th of March.
Yes, I have that coming up.
Yeah.
So just a quick reminder, we're on Moon 8. So this is a developmental cycle, right? A
Yeah.
primary template for evolutionary advancement.
Yeah.
And we've got the magnetic tone, which we define our purpose. The lunar tone, we have a purpose. So suddenly we get challenged. It turns into a polarity. We get to discover our purpose a little bit more in an edgy way. Then we sort of pull that up with the electric tone. We identify service out of the polarity. The fourth tone, we're going to identify the form that we want to take. The fifth tone, we're going to take a little more command of everything. The sixth rhythmic tone, we're going to try to balance everything out. The seventh tone, we're going to come into a bigger attunement. Now we're at the eighth tone. We have to model integrity in action, but what does that mean?
Mm.
Okay, I wanted to bring up every time, and you and Bella have done a really good job of this, there's a corresponding geometric form really to each tone. And it's like the morphogenic geometry behind the tone. And I felt so resonant with the octahedron being what the eighth tone is about, because the octahedron, notice it. It's a tetrahedron on the top, and then on the bottom, it's like a mirror. And so you're saying you need to integrate or synthesize or balance the polarities above or below. And then it took me into the whole idea of an octave, because the number 8. And in the Western music system, you've got the eighth note after a series of 7 notes that signify sort of completion. And then you raise an octave. The first note becomes a little higher. It's not a frequency, but it's a relationship between the 2 notes. And what happens is the interval increases with the second one. It has twice the frequency of vibration as the first note.
Mm.
So the 8th galactic tone calls for the integration of the first 7 tones, or the steps of the development cycle, and brings us to a new octave, right? So we're going to be looking at that, in general, what does that mean? But then very specifically with the arthropods. So often, as you and Bella say, there's different questions you might ask with the different steps. And with number 8, the question is, do I live what I believe? Because we're asked to harmonize and model and integrate these first 7 steps. And it's the stage where the structural foundation that we created in the 4th tone is brought up to alignment with a cosmic consciousness. Because the question we asked in the 4th tone is, what is the form of my action? But now we're going to say, okay, I've kind of decided on the form. Can I live it out? So if you want to look at a relationship, it's like the 4th tone, we've built a container, or the how, and now the 8th tone, we want to fill that container with integrity, cosmic light, sort of the truth of how that rises. So we have a structural foundation growing into an action within the foundation. And we want to have that action be in harmony with our deeper cosmic purpose. So I chose the arthropods for this, which is the interesting conversation, as we'll get into. Now, we know from all our indigenous cultures that grandmother spider is just highly regarded as a prominent figure in many traditions. Sacred, wise creator, weaves the web of life and fate, and really represents the interconnectedness of all living things, spinning threads that connect humans to the universe, offering protection, offering light, offering guidance. But let's enter the galactic myths of the stellar nations and meet the arthropod stellar soul family, because the story is that, but it's a little bigger than that if we start looking at what we have inside of us, because the arthropods, and in fact all the stellar nations, live in us really as a strand of our galactic light body. It's a kind of a light body DNA. And there's a lot to this. So the name of the nation, if we take the Stallar language, is Niomi Sultano Akashi. Notice the word Akashi, and I'll explain that in a minute. Really, it means records, Akashic records. And the interpretation of that is the arthropods are weavers and sustainers of the chronicles of life. And there's a purpose. Every part of us, every one of these 13 parts, each galactic strand, has a mission or a purpose. For the arthropods, it's to serve as the eye and the ear of the god and the goddess. It's to supervise and keep an eye on and control how the creative processes work and unfold in different points of the galaxy. So this whole nation, this part of ourself, is overseeing how these processes progress towards their own completion. And that's to give feedback to the source. And that's so source can respond and determine how life should continue in a given sphere of life. So it's kind of creating a feedback system, a conversation with source. Now, further, when I talked about creating Akashic records, I mean, it's almost like the web that the arthropods weave go through every created thing. And it's literally like having a camera on creation, because everything is recorded and reflected exactly as it occurs. And what happens for us, I mean, here in the third dimension, this creates a sense of past, present, and future, which provides referential points for development. If we didn't have that, we'd be rolling around like little balls. We need to have that understanding, and that's what we do get on the third dimension. You could say, really, it creates an engine for evolution. And also, literally, this record keeping, this filming, besides passing it on to the creator so the creator can respond, creates a chamber of mirrors for both the personality and the higher self to review. I mean, Bay and Aniko said they were really surprised when they watched the process, because they sort of assumed the higher self was going to weigh in at the chamber of mirrors. And they said, no, that's not even really an objective enough part of ourselves. It's literally purely what happened from all angles. And there's no subjective weighing in by higher self or personality. So what happens is this creates the necessity for accountability, which prompts evolution. Mm-hmm. Now, we know we've probably gone through many lives where we haven't always accepted what we've seen. We've projected out. We still do that in our lives often. But as a development process, we need this feedback. So that made me think about the fact that, well, from the arthropodic part of ourselves, we really have a very broad perspective and a responsibility, because we can see as well as exist in what's manifest and what's unmanifest, right? I mean, as humans, we're kind of living in the manifest world. We get glimpses of the unmanifest, but our arthropod self really sees the whole spectrum. In fact, really, they kind of live in the unmanifest, watching it. We'll get into that in a minute. So what I want to say is this part of ourselves, or the arthropods, inherently knows the sea of unmanifest that forms the manifest. And they know how the unmanifest can be used to influence the manifest world.
I mean, if we think about it, Leslie, the world of thoughts and intuitions are part of the unmanifest world, right?
Exactly. So very broadly, which brings me to the next point. This is an incredibly multifaceted vision, and it's kind of mirrored in the fact that a lot of insects have very mosaic type vision, right?
That's true, huh? Yeah, like a fly or many insects that have eyes that look a little bit like this.
In fact, I looked it up. So they're called multifaceted compounded eyes, composed of hundreds of thousands of individual independent units called I don't know how to say it, but anyway. So
Omatidia,
thank you. Thank you. So
Omatida, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But this I'm bringing this up because as we weave together and see different things, there's something about this that is germane. So
Mm,
just kind of we'll earmark it as we talk about it. So each of these eye units acts as a separate light receptor with its own lens, its own photoreceptor cells. And what that does is it allows for a really wide and panoramic and highly motion sensitive field of view. I mean, insects vary, but dragonflies have up to 25,000 of these receptors.
I mean, if you just stop and think about that for a second, that must be crazy, right? Having 25,000 different perceptions of reality coming in through your visual equipment in any one moment. I mean, that's a
Right,
lot. It's quite a
right.
lot.
And then I want to say, well, let's imagine that well, particularly in the arthropods. I mean, let's not think of the literal bug,
Mm,
but the whole, what the energy of the arthropods is. We're talking about that kind of vision for the manifest and really unmanifest in the sense of knowing that the unmanifest exists. So let's keep that aside as a thought because it'll kind of weave back in.
sure.
The reason I brought this up is this is another one of the Mayan calendars. And this whole angle of the Mayan calendrical system is really championed by Dr. Kalaman, he's a scientist and he looks at the Mayan system. He loves to track uh, our evolution through the Mayan timelines. And so one of the calendars that he uses is this step rate one that has it looks like the pyramids in Egypt, right? Or not in Egypt, in Mexico, where
Yeah.
we have the step rate pyramids.
Yeah.
Um, Basically, this particular calendar says levels of consciousness have been laid in over time. We started with cellular, went to mammal, family, tribal, regional. In other words, it started getting the site, the cellular was just biological, then mammal biological. But then we started differentiating in the sense of knowing ourselves as families. But when we know ourselves as families, we started to go together as families, and then we had tribes, and then we had regions, and then we had nations. Then finally, the nations realized, oh my gosh, we're on a planet. And all these are simultaneously. And we've basically finished this calendar. I mean, we're living now with all these levels of consciousness concurrently running. But what I want to point out is in 1755 is when we opened up to the planetary underworld. We started as a human species living on the planet. We started realizing, oh my gosh, we're on a planet, not just that we're in, some nation. And that's going to be germane in a lot of ways, which I'll tie in here. I want to bring it up particularly now because this is when the influence of the arthropods really came to the fore. And it's interesting to see how and why as we go through this. So at this time, there was a astronomer, I guess he was, who started naming in the 1750s lots of constellations, and he named them after instruments. Because with the planetary underworld, we saw the whole industrial age start because there was a whole idea of, oh, we can communicate and we can share things in new ways. And the industrial age brought us more towards science and ironically, very specific vision, even though we were realizing we were part of something bigger. But on the other hand, there was a lot of seafaringness. And we're going to see that in a minute when I show you the different constellations and how they were named. So there was a lot of exploration of the world, and yet there was a lot of precision with scientific instruments trying to define what was being seen. So this was the dawn of the industrial age. And then we started moving into the economies of creating and using machines rather than handmade things. Interestingly, in 1781, Uranus was discovered. What does Uranus tell us? Uranus is about breaking boundaries.
Hmm.
Well, in a way, yes, there's whole new boundaries. There's a planetary underworld. And yet we seem to be grappling with defining it, exploring it, and yet defining it and make it controllable, which I'll get into in a minute. But there's something very interesting too. We're going to bring this in a little bit later. But when Ra Uru who brought in, he was kind of just infused with the human design system in 1987. He was shown that in 1781, when Uranus was seen and identified by the collective, that there was actually a shift in the human form from a seven-centered to a nine-centered being, that we
Mm.
literally had a mutation in our visual cortex, which opened us up from specific focus that was more binocular to developing a peripheral and receptive vision, which I thought was kind of interesting vis-a-vis the insects and the kind of eyes we just talked about. And yet, as we go along, we're going to see this peripheral vision was not encouraged. Okay.
Could just pause on this slide for it. That slide is really interesting, Leslie. Just a couple of things too. I've seen this many times before. It's super interesting, and every time either you talk about it or somebody else does, I gain a new insight from it. And of course, it's a little confusing with the dates. The whole thing, each underworld is 20 times shorter than the previous one. And what it seems to me is that time, as we understand it through this evolution of consciousness, really did probably conclude in 2012. Which is why I find it so interesting. He puts all Underworlds complete on October the 28th, weirdly my birthday, 2011, which is pretty much over a full year away from the winter solstice in 2012. Even if I count 260 days from February the 11th when that started, it still doesn't take us that period. So I have some questions about that. But what I understand overall is that, especially with where you're going here in the arthropods, and is that the universal underworld is what we've been dealing with the arthropods, because they brought the universal underworld to planet Earth, and we've been experiencing the rapid acceleration since, as this chart and you've already said, since the industrial age. And of course, Uranus was discovered, and then the seven centered to the nine. I think I asked you this before, and I seem to recall that you said it wasn't the case. But does that relate to the chakras and the arrival or awareness of our Earth and Soul Star chakras?
Not really. If you look at the
No.
human design chart, but I mean, maybe in a way it does because it's presentient about the fact that we're morphing. And but it doesn't literally if you look at that system
That's
at this
that's what
point.
I thought, but it's interesting to me because the Soul Star is what connects us actually to those star systems, and the Earth Star is what connects us into the ancestral Earth, even the inner Earth. And so it seems to tie in with that moment of our evolutionary development where we were going more unmanifest, as you would say, into realms that perhaps are not traditionally what we would call 3D. So it depends on which way you look at it, but I
Yeah.
find the whole thing super interesting.
And I don't know human design well enough to do it justice, but you could argue, there's something called the magnetic monopole that feels things and is kind of our guide. I mean, what human design says basically is that we're energetically set up. We almost have to think of our consciousness coming into a body that is like some kind of car that has certain features on it. And we have
Mm.
to learn that's the energy matrix we have to work with. And our soul, for some reason, came in with that. And that if we work with it, we're going to find what we need to find. We're going to be opening to this peripheral and receptive vision. We're going to be getting out of the conditioning of just living in the collective telling us what life is.
Right, and I think that's a good analogy using the body as a vehicle or as a car. What we're doing even now in these moments with all of the energies available is we're actually upgrading the technology of our car. Rather than having the old school system that uses up and down indicators, now you just push a button and the indicator comes on, and now you don't even have to have a map to know where you're going because the computer in the car tells
Right,
you it. In the old days,
right,
we all had a road atlas and we got lost multiple times,
right.
but we did know where we were on the earth, interestingly enough, which many people don't now with sat navs. But the last thought I have, Leslie, and I think this really relates to Stellar Nations, is that period of sea exploration often makes me think of a period of star exploration because traveling across the seas, really to the men of those times, must have been a bit like us traveling between stars and planets. because you didn't really know where you were going most of the time, unless, of course, you had a map from the Templars from 500 years before or something. So some of them did know where they were going. But I always liked the energy of that intrepid exploration that going into space would conjure up Star Trek. And then I think about those old mariners of the past traveling across the Sargasso Sea after the fall of Atlantis for the first time, rediscovering America and meeting people who maybe were different colors to them and with different cultures and ate different foods. It would literally be like discovering an alien race the first time you met those
Yeah, well,
beings, right?
I think we do it on Earth, and that's an
We do,
analogy of
yeah.
how we did it, but
It's
we
the
do it
mirror,
there. And they very much use the stars. So they were probably more connected than we thought.
probably,
And,
yeah.
and as far as being different kind of cars, I think one of the lessons of that is you have a certain model and make, and you have certain buttons, and I'm a totally different one. So it's pretty stupid for me to think that I need to look at you or someone else and go, oh, I'm supposed to be able to turn the window down like that. Well, my car doesn't work like that, you
Right.
know?
It'd be like getting the manual for a Ford Escort when you actually own a Volkswagen and wondering why it doesn't really fit with the pictures with what you've got
Yeah,
in your car because it's not, it's a
yeah.
different model altogether.
And well, I think that's what the whole expansion of vision is
Yeah.
to realize, and it's also about realizing our own apprehension of the bigger energies, and that our consciousness is the bigger energy, and it's trying to come through a form.
Yeah.
But to honor the form and know the form so that you can, the consciousness can learn from that. But it's
Yeah.
also about getting away from, I mean, it's ultimately about moving away from the hierarchy and the outside conditioning. It's about like what we're realizing now.
Yeah.
We're needing to move from the inside up, although we're trying to be made to move from the outside with all the outer forces that want to keep their control. And that's we're going to get into that a little more with the arthropods. So yeah, I just the sky is incredible. All these were named, for instance, they're all instruments. Fomax is a laboratory furnace.
Right.
It really just kind of talks about this whole beginning of what was called the Age of Enlightenment, as far as the focus being on science. The sculptor, there was also some art things here. The sculptor was a machine used in a sculptor studio. The octan was wherever that is. Okay, that's it's a very crucial tool for sailors. They use it to measure celestial angles. Of course, the microscope here. The hologym honors the inventor of the pendulum clock, which is really just saying, oh, isn't scientific precision wonderful? The calum here is a chisel or engraver's tool. So you get the idea. The Mensa, interestingly, we think of it as this society for the brains. Um, it's actually the Latin word for table, and wherever this man Nicholas Lacal, I'm not sure of his last name, wherever his observation point was, there was a mountain outside his window, and it was called Table Mountain. But the large Magellanic cloud, which we're going to get into in a minute, sat right on top of it. He could see it over it, and he thought of it as a tablecloth on the table. So they named it Mensa, which has nothing to do with the Mensa Society, which is being very smart and getting invited to be around the round table with smart people. But maybe it has a little overlay without. A lot of this is uncannily unconscious, but lots of like double meanings. You know, what I want to say there is we also had the pupus, the vela, and the carina are parts of a ship. And it used to be the Argo constellation, where I'm not sure what it was called, but the whole idea was it was Jason going after the Golden Fleece to get his rightful throne back. And when Nicholas came along, he go, "Oh, that's way big. No, no, we can't have that." And he broke it into three pieces. But I find that's kind of symbolic in a way because
Right.
everything about, as well as things were opening up with the sailors and all that, and with this idea of the scientists, oh, we're exploring, we're going to know the world. But in many ways, they were closing down because the imagination, the art was the sense of the individual contributing was sort of being cut off. Now, the reason I circled the Dorado constellation means goldfish or dolphin is because this is actually the entry to two other little galaxies that are not in the Milky Way, but are right next to us. And they're called the Large Magellanic Cloud and the Small Magellanic Cloud. They're kind of related, but they're two separate galaxies. And the reason they're called Magellanic, think about Ferdinand Magellan, the
Mm-hmm.
sailor.
Yeah.
He was sailing those waters and he named it after, somebody named it after him.
Hey,
It's basically,
actually, Leslie, they've just made a movie about him and that voyage. I think it's literally about to come out, interestingly, about his journey around the world. It's quite the story if you've ever read it.
oh, wow, that's fascinating. No, okay. Well, it is interesting it's coming out, especially if we go on, maybe.
And
Um,
also, something that's just struck me though, which you've mentioned before, is about this division of the Argo. And whenever I think about the arthropods, I see fragmentation into smaller pieces as being part of their signature. And wherever fragmentation occurs, the arthropodic energy is normally involved. And if we think about that world of exploration, what it really did was made the world smaller, but it also fragmented it into lots of tiny nationalities. Before the 1700s, most of those national boundaries I don't think existed, and most of those countries probably didn't exist in the modern form. And so since then, the world has got smaller, but I perceive it as becoming more fragmented in many ways. So I don't know what you think about that, but
well, I mean, we did have the nations before that, but they didn't realize they were part of a larger planet. And then when
right.
they saw they were part of the planet, they're like, oh, we better define ourselves and have our boundaries. Before it didn't matter. You just lived in your nation and you didn't really realize probably as much, or you didn't feel, I don't know. It's a good question
I
because,
mean, there were definitely nations, but I don't think there were national borders. And if you
right,
pass from the old medieval France into medieval Spain, I'm pretty sure it was still just a track, and eventually people would start to speak a different language. But I don't perceived that there were sort of borders in those days. And the formalization of borders and passports and rites of passage from one country to the other really, I feel, has fragmented our collective unity and made us divided. It's like I can't go there because somebody said that I can't because I don't
right.
have the right paperwork, which is really absurd if you think about it.
No, it's ridiculous. I mean, back in the old days, then we maybe had borders by wars.
Yeah,
A king said, "Oh, they're going to invade, and we're going to go get him." But you're right; it wasn't as formalized.
right. It wasn't as formalized.
So anyway, as I said, these are two companion galaxies linked to our Milky Way, and there's a very important reason I'm bringing them up because the large Magellanic Cloud is where the spider beings come from and operate out of. And it's the home to Naomi. Naomi is in the stellar nations, is the great spider mother, grandmother, goddess, however you want to configure her, but she is absolutely the queen. And she weaves the galactic web from here. And this galactic point is referred to as macula magellanica inside the large
Macula
Magellanica cloud.
Magellanica.
Yeah,
And I've just checked
thank
for
you.
those interested in the 13 sign sidereal placement. It's actually pretty interesting. It's at the anaretic degree of Virgo.
Oh, that's interesting. Like right at the end?
Right at the end, because I'm just tracking it against my own placements in my chart, and I have Mars at 13 in
Okay.
Scorpio, and so that's just 2 degrees back. So I just backtracked it back, and my Mars is 1, so it must be in the final degree, mass or menos of Virgo. So if you're wondering where it is in 13 sign, it's around that last degree of Virgo. Yeah.
Someday before we do these shows, we should get together and figure that out.
Yeah, we've been saying, promising we're going to do a
Right.
revised natal chart one day.
Okay. Now I want to tell you something. I'm going to take a little side trip here because I just want us to feel the magic of things that is interwoven with all this. With the galaxy, with life, because life on the third dimension doesn't always feel so magical, especially now. Okay. So Bayononico saw that in the small Magellanic Cloud, it's really inhabited by special creatures, and there's kind of a conversation between the large and small ones. So keep that in mind while you're hearing it. I'll just paraphrase this. In that small cloud, there's very different, colorful, rainbow-like iridescent beings. They're like kind of a mix of fairies and nymphs, They have a very subtle and bright, very diffusive, volatile light body, and they can take up form and then dissolve, back, forth, back, forth. They have beautiful voices. It's like they're constantly singing, and the sounds and lights keep transforming inside of them, and it's like they're reflecting each other. Um, and they said they felt like they were some kind of special elemental beings. And then over time, more and more different faces and qualities appeared and introduced themselves as if they were elementals of the primary elements of all the creative ideas. So they said, it's interesting that they are the companions of the Milky Way galaxy because the energy emanating from them is very much needed for sustaining our lives. They seem like a source of power. It's like they're embodied elementals of idea sparks. So when we talk about manifest and unmanifest, idea sparks are sort of like maybe some kind of energy that bridges those two. Now, when something or anything starts to be created in the galaxy, then in the moments before realization, the idea or the creative thought inflames somewhere, and then it receives life and consciousness, and the first elemental is born from it. And they said you can think of this in a way that these elementals are actually the molecules, atoms, light cells of all the manifestations in this galaxy. They're like the primeval elements that construct and infiltrate all the realities in a way that they invoke, move, and arrange the particle that they represent and manifest according to the desired harmony, or sometimes it's disharmonious. So what they were saying is we can see that we actually gain energy even from a distant little galaxy, and that everything is interconnected by such an amazingly complex and incomprehensibly wonderful heavenly order within the life of the universe. And I just wanted to bring that in because that is important to remember.
Yeah, beautiful.
All right. This is another one of those sort of interesting things. There's a very large nebula in the Large Magellanic Cloud, and nebulas are cradles that birth new stars. But way back when, astronomers thought the nebula looked like a tarantula, and they named it the Tarantula Nebula. I mean, this is before anybody identified that we have arthropod parts of our DNA, and that's the home of the arthropods. But something about our human consciousness or psyche brought that through. It was named the Tarantula Nebula. So when I talk about Bayanonical having these experiences, we basically know that their consciousness was expanded into these galactic Akashic records, and they were asked to record them in 2005 and 6. So this is where these stories are coming from. When they met Naomi, it was hard at first. She's like 100 feet tall. She doesn't have the same like prototypical beauty of the queen. I mean, she's kind of a spider tarantula, like, red little bits of hair. They recognized that they had a little bit of fear or something in them. She didn't fit a prototype, and she confronted them. I will accept you, but you have to accept me, just because I'm not beautiful. And of course they let everything melt. And then she picked them up. They said it was quite the ride to go up in her 100-foot arms. But
Right.
anyway, she then took them in. She gave them the privilege, she said, of sharing some of the secrets with them, but also thereby making it an accessible reality to the entire humanity on Earth. Because that's why Bayanonico were given this information. It's
Yeah.
like it was time for us to start to understand, actually to move beyond the planetary consciousness to the stellar, to know that we were much more. So they were first taken into a very incomprehensibly large cave system where all the technologies of operating the web are kept. And that's keyword technology. The arthropods have technology because you've got a two-strand system of the web pulling information out and bringing information down. And there's all kinds of the stellar worlds of the arthropods that they're in charge of. They're like transfer stations, and there's all kinds of equipment to package up the information. So anyway, technology is one of the gifts of the arthropod. The thing is, Naomi is the only one who really knows how to fully use it. She's been trained
Mm.
by the divine. So we'll see how that comes in a minute. So as she brought them through the treasury, um, they came next into a very large cave. And then they started seeing in part of the cave, they realized, whoa, we're really in a mine. And there were trams coming up, and each tram was filled with an incredibly dense magmatic substance of light. And Naomi told them that there's three little stars in the galaxy of the large cloud, which have a very special structure. Their centers consist of very high specific gravity molecules of light, which have special magnetic qualities. And what Naomi does is she ejects these molecules of light, and the molecules line up like a string of beads, and they're held in balance of attraction and repulsion between them. And this is the way the intergalactic network is born. She picks her point, at any distance, and when she ejects them to the destination point, it like anchors there. And those beads of light have a kind of radioactivity, so they create an individual life sphere around them while they don't interact with other celestial bodies through gravity. And they don't settle into orbits of the celestial bodies either. I mean, they don't match any laws of physics that we would know in our world. And she just continues to eject molecules of light, and they line up like these string of beads, and they're held in a balance of attraction and repulsion between them. But the thing about this is ceaseless and continual work, because a lot of times the net will fray or things change, and she just has to keep doing it. So,
A spider's always weaving its web, right? If you watch them, it never stops weaving.
yeah, well, that's probably the reflection down on our
Right.
level.
Yeah.
Now, so why I wrote this here, task, 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 task. All right, there's Naomi doing this, but there's the trams bringing up the light. And the tarantulas, particularly the males, are responsible to bringing this up. And it's constant mining, constant work. And then they're not only bringing the light up, they're needing to maintain the light particles in the net in certain ways. So a lot of times when I think about the arthropods nation, and we'll go on to hear more, but I think, that's a lot like a part of us on the 3D when we feel like, oh my God, to deal with 3D, it just needs a kind of a constant monitoring to have objects to keep them, to keep them repaired, to make them, it's just
Yeah. To
not
maintain
some
even, right?
right. And we also have that kind of feeling too, I think, in the 3D. And then we can bring this in a little later, maybe reflect on it. But it's interesting in this nation because it's the males who are serving the queen. It's pretty hierarchical, and they have to work constantly. So let's just go over to look at what the life cycle of a tarantula is. They emerge from the egg and they grow. And as they grow, they go through actually several molts. They literally like sort of lose their outer beak like a snake would,
Mm.
and they mature into different sizes and stages until they reach their full size. Now, females can live for several decades, but males, on the other hand, usually go through their final molt at 5 to 7 years, and their mouth parts actually turn into sexual organs. So at that period, they can't eat. It's kind of like they're impelled to seek out a mate, and they mate with the mate, which is good because that ensures new life. The woman, the female spider, is going to fill up with eggs and start a whole new batch. But they're basically starving to death while this happens. And sometimes the females actually eat them after the mating. So there are males who are selected to mate with Naomi, and that actually gives her the energy to continue making and restoring the web, which is the ceaseless endeavor, right? Now, think of this metaphorically. It's not very pleasant, but it is kind of like, well, let's keep going and then we can make a conclusion.
Doesn't seem like a good job on paper, does it? You're going to work really, really hard. You're going to have some weird stuff happen to your mouth. You're going to starve, and then you're going to have an amazing moment, and that's it. You're all done. And if you're lucky, you might get eaten by the person you mated with. I don't think
Right.
too many people would take that contract up front if it was laid out like that.
I know, and that's kind of what happened, but let's talk about it that actually in the colony at its highest, this is considered a celestial ritual of mating with a goddess when they
Mhm.
are chosen to be with Naomi.
Yeah.
It's held in very great respect. Even though it ends in their death, it's considered a celebration because the body and soul are transcended by the sacrifice, redeemed and dissolved into the holy substance of the golden light magma. And it because that's the actual fate of the male, they're fulfilling their fate and it becomes part of the great divine work of art. They become part of the network of light. They become part of the celestial network. They have a whole different perspective on things. And their life is sublimated and reborn in a higher quality, which made me think about the raising up an octave, which I talked about. Well, what is the eighth tone? You know, you're going through a cycle of development, and then you've got to actualize it up in a certain way to something that's not as known, that you have to grasp something bigger and harmonize the structure within a bigger ideal. But it's a horrible metaphor. I mean, it makes us cringe. But if we put it really just as a metaphor to our lives, um, I think we often feel like this, that we work, 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 work. Oh, it's way too big a sacrifice, some of the things we're asked for. Sometimes we stay with the safety of what we know, even though it's kind of repetitive and dull, instead of taking that leap into renewal. How do we know that the leap is not going to bring us into something really amazing? I mean, the divine kind of works like that. It asks us, I mean, there's all these, I don't know what you'd call them, kind of celestial laws. One of them is the mystery of letting go.
Right.
And they're as simple as they sound, but they're not. The mystery of letting go is you have to let go. But what happens is you get caught afterwards. But you absolutely have to let go with no bargaining to know that anything's going to work.
Right. I
Um,
guess it's the spider's version of their own ascension process. Somehow you work like a dog, you have an amazing epiphany, and then you cross.
yeah, and look at it's fulfilling its fate. But now
Yeah.
I want to say, let's take this in a bigger context. This is one of 13 strands of galactic DNA. This is a part of us.
Hmm.
Now, it doesn't, this is the, this is kind of what creation is asking of one part of us to know and learn. Now, there are other parts of us having different experiences. So, from our perspective as cosmic humans, do we have to get so, telescoped on this as like, oh God, this is terrible? Well, I guess in our arthropod part, but once you join the celestial network, I mean, you're going to be seeing the broader, you're going to be the broader, you're going to be carrying all those codes, you're going to be in the middle of the manifest and the unmanifest.
It's
So
the
just
same thing,
think,
right? It's you make the leap of faith into the unknown and you're reborn into a much bigger universe.
right. And I really see that's why I put the arthropods for the eighth tone. I feel like that's what the eighth tone is saying. It's the first time we're being asked to jump, so to speak. It's
Mm.
like, look, you created this foundation. What are you going to do with it? All right. And then if you don't take the initiation at that height or renewal, you don't, nothing else happens. You're going to fall back. And let's kind of look because the what happens with the arthropods and consequently what we can see around us is a good example of what happens when you don't have take the initiation, when you seize and don't take it. And look, I also want to say we are patterning. This whole idea of what we're talking about with these steps is patterned after the one constant rhythmic cycle in creation that happens in 13 steps of development in many different ways, in many different frameworks. So I'm saying as humans, we're called into this is a real big first step, the eighth tone into something. And we can blow it. And I think what we're looking at now is maybe that the eighth tone has been a choke point for us in some ways as humanity, and it can't be any longer. Okay, so what happened? Like we said, well, what an awful thing. There was a huge revolt. Um, at some point in history, a group of male workers revolted against their own fate and their own nation. Now, they did that partly because of the fear of death and partly because of an incredibly defiant rage. They felt like they were victims and they didn't want to be victims. They didn't want to serve the queen. They didn't want to be in a hierarchical structure. And their rage was, I want to destroy and demolish the complete system. The system is terrible. It creates endless work. It's a constant and never-ending job. There's no escape. Well, there is if you take your fate, but they didn't like their fate. So
It makes me think about the opposite of the web, the dark web or the inverted web, and the fact that the arthropods help create that, an automated world where there's no work done by anybody because it's all done by artificial intelligence, apparently, and automatons. And so I can see how their desire to remove the original web and replace it with the one that we've been living under came to be. It kind of makes sense now.
yeah, except um, there's a few hangups with that. So we know that, but let's keep looking at how it worked out for them or is working out.
Right. Yeah. How is it working out today for these people?
Okay.
Yeah.
So what also in that revolt, they stole a lot of the technologies from the treasury and they don't really know how to use them. They don't have totally proper training, but they use them to capture the life reviews.
Yeah.
And that's an invaluable commodity, and it's been sold to the other fallen factions, over and over. And especially with the fallen male serpents who have their mastery of the sciences. Um, Using those technologies is not pretty because that's what we see. The technologies can create the highest level of distortion through holographic projections. And then also minor mistakes that people make because it's all in the Akashic records, it's all there. And they're like, oh, look, that human is sensitive to this. Let's project it back to them. Let's capture their mind with images that they can't erase. Let's amplify their guilt. Let's create manageable puppets caught in a painful and self-tormenting cycle.
Yeah.
Now, there's numerous reasons they want to do that, which we'll get into in a minute. But
Sounds very much a lot like some of the things that are being discovered in those pesky files, right? It's all in
yeah,
there.
yeah. And that's the point, that our
Yeah.
real foes are, well, even more than I think the next step of really realizing those files are the real foes are hiding in the invisible astral
Yeah.
spheres. And they are working in our world through expansive global institutional systems. But these are carrying the codes of the fallen arthropods, the fallen male serpents, the fallen dragon, and the fallen angels.
Right, we've been talking about these beings from the astral perspective for quite a while in our tribe, the so-called mafia bosses. If you know the energies of the fallen mafia bosses from the stellar nations, you can actually identify who they are in our collective world by the energies.
Yeah,
Who are the big male tarantulas in charge of the social media networks and all of the media? Once you understand that, you can understand who the tarantulas are in our world who are still have been holding sway over the inverted grid. So it's very interesting to do that observation. You can see the fallen dragons, the fallen snakes, the fallen angels, because
yeah,
all in those files, every single one of these things you'll say
right,
is all
right,
part
right,
of what we're discovering about the world that we've been living in, but didn't realize we were living in.
right. Well, but and it's actually, we need to wake up to
Of
that. And
course
I
we do.
mean,
Yeah, we need
yeah,
it.
the one thing I like about the stellar nations is, you can see it in the galactic myth as the relational patterns, and you realize, wow, this is a big thing.
Yeah.
And you realize that it exists kind of in a long-term way, and then we're dealing it in a big way. I mean, it takes it moves off a little bit of the well, I don't know, let's just keep going.
Well, even,
Sometimes,
sorry, Leslie, I was just thinking about the selling of people's information. I mean, it's been a big issue in our world, the selling of people's data for manipulation and exploitation. And of course, that's a large part of the whole leverage and blackmailing that's involved in all of this. And right here, we can see where that sort of started from, right?
yeah, no, it's very active.
Yeah.
And yet, so the thing about it though is the fallen arthropods didn't really escape in a way because the victim mentality persists. There's this real feeling of anger that they're subject somehow. Why did you make me, like this? Why they're subjects of God's revenge? Like the creator is not doesn't like them. And
Mm.
so they don't have like a certainty of faith. And there's a real reckless acting out proactively because it's like tempting God in faith, like show me you love me type of thing. I mean, this is very unconscious, but it's really like, it's a very wounded place. It's like looking for a response, like trying to provoke some bigger force to reveal itself, but not that they would even believe it necessarily. But what it gives is kind of a frenetic gambling quality and a kind of an obsession and addiction in their actions. And it's also like, you know what? If I'm going to be punished by the god and the goddess, then let everyone else be punished, everyone else be devastated. And that's what we can't sometimes understand. This absolute seemingly severance of the gnosis codes. Like, where is the light in you? Well, they don't feel like they have it. And maybe, I don't know, it's probably there somewhere. But somehow in this matrix of um you know their their task, their fate, this is what's come up. But we have to remember this is a part of ourselves and it's been very active in us, and it still can be feeling victim. And we can say, oh, get out of here, and in some ways some of that may be taken from creation, but at this moment we also have to realize that's part of creation and use the mirror that it gives us for part of ourselves. And the other part of this is the fallen factions don't necessarily respect them. It's more like, what can I get from you? They use them and really are more interested in what they can get from them. So it's not like they've gained any respect. They still haven't gotten beyond being kind of the lower, the put upon. Now, I'm just going to talk about, not at great length, but there are two stellar worlds that are really the nexus centers of the worst of the arthropodic activity. And Zeta Reticuli is one. Call it home of the grays. We tend to call, these kind of fallen beings the grays. But I want to say, isn't that something that's gray, no color, no emotion? That's what it looks like, or what happens when we don't surrender to the renewal in full faith to the organic divine network. And that's where we're really at that point now. We really have to somehow take a leap of faith.
And you know what, Leslie, you've just prompted me because we were talking about this before we hit record. We were talking about the experience of the grey world. Now, I wasn't necessarily thinking of the greys when we were talking about that, but now that I'm thinking about it, the odd occasions that I've experienced the grey world, it's like being taken into a world where there's no sense of joy or happiness. There's just an unending, almost like narcissistic futility that doesn't have any heart emotion, which for those of us who have heart is really quite a startling experience because it feels like you have nowhere to go. Like
I
there's no
know.
end to the grayness. It just goes on and on. And yet within that grayness, there's also a feeling of being manipulated in that space. I don't know if anyone else out there has had that sensation. I've spoken to a few people who've experienced the grey world. Me and Leslie have both experienced it. And I often think it might be the world that the greys actually inhabit somehow.
Oh
That's how
no,
their
no,
world
that
is.
their whole being has become
Yeah,
that. That's what we have to realize.
yeah.
But that should give us incentive as a mirror to
Well, for
to to
compassion at least, like
well, yes, but also incentive to say, I'm gonna have the guts to take an initiation.
right,
And
yes.
the other thing about it, it's kind of ironic. We know that they need to source their energy from keeping people down and basically, whatever, eating their frequency.
It's
Talk
vampiric
about,
energy, right?
yeah, yeah. So talk about, the weirdness of when they are in their last years and they can't eat anymore. I don't know what they don't have organic energy. It has to become coming from other people that they make
Right.
victims.
Yeah.
So I just want to say there's 26 stellar worlds that are those transfer stations of the information I talked about that travel the web. 15 of them are co-opted by the fallen negative uh,
Mm.
arthropods. And the biggest ones I'm going to bring up, one is the Zeta Reticuli, which I already said. And it's interesting because reticuli comes from the Latin word reticulum, which means of the net. Like,
Hmm.
again, why was it named that? We didn't know that when it was named that, at least consciously.
Right.
Here's where the Maganalelic is. This is the Dorado, so it's right near there.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it means of the net. The other star that is really heavy populated by the arthropods is Polaris. Now, that's not good. That's our pole
Mm.
star.
It's not good
Okay.
at all.
Okay. That is also in the Ursa Minor constellation. This was once a bear star, a Christ star, and the other three stars in the Ursa Minor are different stations of learning how to be a teacher of Christ consciousness, very specifically. This Polaris as a bear star was where the bear souls would come to sort of almost like to discharge a spa experience. Well, I've had some really hard times. I don't feel centered. You come to Polaris, they sort of wash themselves clean. They put out what their problems were. They talk about it. They reflect on it. Okay, I'm ready to go again. But what it means is Polaris in its etheric field holds like the worst vulnerabilities of the kindest, most heart-centered souls. And that's part of what the arthropods can then take that information and pour it back. I mean, they can amplify. If you ever feel really bad and you're like, where is this coming from? And I don't know, maybe it's not coming from you. Maybe there's some pulse coming in because now that's part of what it is. The EMFs that we have all around our world now, increasingly for the last, especially 2 decades, but the satellites, those are the frequencies that are literally the food of the fallen ones. They live in those frequencies, they eat those frequencies, they're happy as heck in those frequencies. Biologically, they stress us like crazy. We're trying to mutate like crazy to work with them. Okay, now here's something that's interesting though, and this is where I always want to go, well, I don't know what's happening here with the divine plan. Polaris is near the Big Dipper, and the Big Dipper has the 7 seeds of Christ consciousness. We talked about that last time when we talked about the bears. But these are the fifth or sixth dimensional platforms that are beyond polarity, unconditional love, acceptance, trust, and compassion. The seasons alternate with the Big Dipper always going around Polaris and always having this corner star pointing right at it. This corner star is debut unconditional love. Okay. Um, Now let's go back to 1987. 1987 on January 3rd is when Ra Uruhu he lived on the island of Obisba at that time. He had left his life in Canada, a very interesting, eccentric soul who had left everything and moved to that island off of Spain. And he was walking home to his remote cabin one night on the top of a hill that was dark. It should have been dark, but it had light in it. And he's like, what's that? Anyway, he walked into it, and for 8 days straight, he was kind of knocked out. His dog was knocked out under the desk, who was accompanying him. And he said he felt like he was burned through with the human design system. And now if you really get into human design, it's preparation for a very great shift in 2027 next year. Okay, so there was that. But then a month later, on February 24th of 87, scientists saw that there was a supernova arrived. Of course, that exploded. How many? We don't know how many thousands of years ago, but the light arrived to Earth. It was first noted when it was seen. When you see it, the light is arriving. So that day in February, I think it was seen first in Argentina, and then another astrological site saw it a few days later. But they identified it as coming from the Tarantula Nebula. And so, with its dying breath, all those neutrinos from the Tarantula Nebula, from that spider consciousness, bombarded us with subatomic information. And for 14 minutes, everyone on Earth received 3 times as many neutrinos as normal. So that impacting our consciousness. But with what? It was coming from the Tarantula Nebula. And we've talked about neutrinos. They're called ghost particles. They have a little bit of mass, so which is perceived to be the fact that they carry some kind of information, but they don't have enough mass that they literally go through everything. So the idea is, well, oh, they'd be traveling through us with their information. So that's why the idea was that they were impacting human consciousness. Then, interestingly, that's the year 1987, where Jose Arguelles, he had been working up to this a long time, conceiving the dream spell, knowing everything, finding everything he found. But he's like, that's a very important date. I think it was the beginning of the last Sirius cycle. I'm not sure, the 52 years. I forgot to look that up. But anyway, he said that's a very important date. It's really important that humans gather in prayer for peace. It was called the harmonic convergence because the basic prayer was, let's have harmony. I mean, harmony is a whole different state of being. Now, Bay and Aniko looked at that, and there's a lot centered around what they learned. And they were shown that that's when enough human beings joined that day so that there was a tipping point, and the ascension timeline was anchored parallel to the apocalyptic timeline. And we've been going ever since.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting because I actually I know a couple people who knew Jose, but one of them traveled with him at that time. And she said he called a big meeting earlier that year in 87. And he had all these books and charts, and he was trying to convince this group of people who were close to him, we have to do this. We have to let humanity know. And she said it was interesting because nobody saw it. He finally he closed his books and he said, okay, if that's what it's going to be, and he walked away. But she said over the next few months, they all kind of woke up to it. And you have to imagine this was before the internet. And like she started doing posters and putting them out. Somehow it got out. I have another friend who was driving across the Midwest with her husband and like 2 twin babies of 1 year old. And they stopped at a convenience store for something to drink. And she saw the poster on the bulletin board and the date. And she's like, I have to do that. I have to do that. So somehow it went around in human consciousness. But this was a very interesting year. But I particularly want to bring it in because of the Tarantula Nebula, because brings up one more thing. You want to say something?
Yeah, just 1987, for those music aficionados out there, particularly those from the British music scene, will remember that 1987 was the second summer of love when a group of DJs who went to the same island Arguelles was on Ibiza discovered a new type of music called house music that completely changed Britain's youth for the next 20 years.
Oh
And it
my
started
goodness.
in 1987. They called it the second summer of love. DJs like Danny Rampling and Pete Tong, who became household names in Britain, went to that island and brought back a new type of music that just a few years later, by the early 90s, when I was at the age to go out and enjoy that music, it was very much a part of our generation's scene in the early 90s. So some of it was not so good for lots of reasons that you can imagine in the hedonistic world of clubland. But what I do remember was in those early days that there was a unified feeling on the dance floor where everybody had their arms around each other and everybody saw brothers and sisters that they loved even if it was only in a haze of whatever we'd all consumed, it still felt genuine. And that resonance from those days as an 18-year-old carried me through a large part of my life because it felt like it meant something. I'd never seen that many people unified in the space of heart connection. Um, and of course, things change. Those kinds of things get squashed by our various authorities, all of which, of course, happened fairly quickly in Britain and was outlawed. And then everything was commercialized and put into a realm where it could be controlled. But I think it's interesting that all of that seemed to happen, Leslie, in that year. And a lot of it happened in that incredibly Aphrodite island of Ibiza. And
Yes,
so there
yes,
must have been a pulse there that came from the goddess that wanted
yes,
people to connect in different ways through music and sound and
yes,
all of
yes. But
those
I'm
things.
also
Yeah.
saying, isn't it interesting that the nebula came from the arthropods? We'll tie that in a minute. But
Right.
it also it also created a tighter net, because if you start looking at what happened, I mean, you can realize now looking back how this insidious force has been in control for a very long time. Even earlier in the century with the world wars, with big pharma taking over from the organic homeopathy and all. You could go on and on and on, education with the Rockefellers. But Bayononico said actually starting in 87, particularly in 87, some of the children born then were born with their karma a little more cleared because they were coming in service to this pulse. And
Mm,
that's exactly when if you look what happened, that generation has been so challenged with the devices coming in, with the
internet.
foods being really, with the commercials, with the over sexualization. It's been tricky. Now, interestingly, um, we may be getting a whole new batch of different kinds of souls coming through in 2027 through children, but that's another
Mm,
topic, maybe for another time. But I want to step back a minute since we're trying to put ourselves in bigger frameworks. And I want to just remind us, I've said this before, but in that larger matrix, we're at a juncture where there's three different large cycles coming to an end. We've got 26,000 year Earth Sun Pleiadian cycle while the entire Pleiadian system, which is including our solar ring, is at the end of a 230 million year orbit around the galactic center. And then the entire Milky Way galaxy is at the completion of an infinitely longer orbit around the great central sun. Now, these are all synchronistically and simultaneously completing. And so it's been compared to like the last step of a spiral dance within a dance. It's a very crucial transition time. The one woman who writes about it here, Amora Kwan Yin, talks about it as like we could be pulled up, we want to be pulled up, and Bay and Aniko talk about it as we're coming to a time of a galactic rearrangement potentially, or actually, I don't know what it looks like, but this woman Amora says it's like being pulled up on the next ring of a spiral. So here again, the next octave, right? We've been living through a creation cycle of polarity. We have been asked to be experiencers. We've been everything. We've been victimizers. Um, we've learned both sides in the polarities. The next ring is to move into being co-creators, which takes a whole different kinds of consciousness, presence, and even nervous system.
yeah.
Because when you're a co-creator, it's more that dandelion fifth dimensional consciousness where you are listening to the moment and what creation wants to do through you, and you're responding to that in yourself, but with others.
Yeah.
And it just makes it's a whole different collective reality.
Right.
So I want to just ask us to, or invite us to say, as weirdly like ugly as it looks, is this is part of a divine plan, and perhaps, and what is the role of the arthropods? Um, and if we can take up the eighth tone in full integrity, I think that's what we're being called to do. And I don't know why it has to go so horribly awry to push us And maybe it's way off the rails. But if we have any bit of our consciousness or gnosis threads left, this is the time to jump into our full integrity, not be afraid, take um, the renewal, whatever that means. I guess that's for us to, figure out with our own passenger consciousness. I want to bring this up. This whole idea of the octahedron recalled that there were some years ago when I constantly I had trained myself to make an octahedron around myself, and that was at the um, suggestion of Tom Kenyon, who's a really wonderful sound healer, and he works with the Hathors, and they come through with different messages. But I couldn't believe it when I looked it up. It was actually 2007. I must have done it all the time for several years back then. He said, just train yourself. Like I used to go to get at red lights. I put it in my system. Every time you come to a red light, picture yourself in an octahedron because it's such a balanced place.
Mhm.
And I started getting to be like much more, used to just being in an octahedron. Of course, I forgot it after a while, but I'm inviting us, if you resonate with it, to just use your imagination creatively, put yourself around it because it really does create this whole integration of the broader above and below. And if you want, you can read tomkenyon.com. He writes a lot about it, from the Hathor's perspective and why they're, suggesting it. So with that, I'm just saying, let's end this whole thought process and what we've just said. Um, Looking at the arthropods at their highest, they are part of the divine, they're part of our DNA. Um, yeah, if we can hold ourselves in a whole in just for a minute, a whole on and see ourselves as balanced, see ourselves, our actions being integritous from what we learn. And Naomi said, she says in the Stellar Nations, you really can't change. I have to be responsible for my nation. There will be a point where they'll be called back. And the fear they're going to feel coming towards me and they're basically probably going to dissolve or just evaporate. I don't know. It's described in the book a bit. But she says what we can do as humans is they've created this false grid. When we see that, we can hold the antipole, we can hold the opposite. If we hold the opposite, like when I showed you that the Big Dipper qualities, if we can just put yourself in a hole and if you have to hold that opposite, she said, that's the work I need you to do. Because when you're in the opposite point, the false one will just it can't exist with it. So that would be my sort of overview of why I did the arthropods here.
Wow. Do you want to take it down and we'll do the wrap up, Leslie? So
Sure.
much to absorb there. And of course, a lot of it's actually pretty familiar, having done this a number of times with you before, but it's good to review it, particularly in this moment, because, at least from my perspective, this is the last great resistance barrier that humanity faced. It's the effect of the arthropods, the fallen arthropods, with all the other fallen nations too. But I personally feel that most of those have been sorted out now. And if I can still see one thing in my world that I feel people are entrapped by, it's this and
Mhm.
this. Because the moment you turn it on and start looking through this, you're immediately into doom scrolling territory, whether you mean to or not,
I
because
know.
it's instinctive for it. We're looking for the security issues in our life. Oh my God, they're going to blow us up tomorrow. That's something that I need to know about. Is it real? Who knows? Is any of it
Mhm.
real? Who knows? My gut instinct at this moment tells me that none of it's real because it's all a projection from those fallen arthropods using the false net. So a lot of my point of being here on planet Earth, and I suspect yours and probably people watching this too, is the removal of that so that we can all remember what it's like to live in true existence, to live in truth. If we think about the 24-degree offset that actually aligned us to Polaris and took us away from Deneb, that's how we got misaligned by the arthropods. They switched us to an alignment that they were controlling and projecting all of these thought manipulations, our astral, emotional body into us, keeping us stuck in hamster cycles, which with the overlay of the hijacked ego mind was easy. All they got to do is pump in a signal, it goes into the hamster wheel, it goes round and around, and you're doing your nut about something at the end of it. That has been an issue for humanity for as long as I can remember in this incarnation. And it got worse once the internet came in. The internet is a great thing, but it is a net. And it caught everybody in it, unless you live as a Bedou somewhere in the Sahara, in which case you might not have got caught by it. But most of us in the Western world have been caught by it. But we've also utilized it. We can see from Jose's experiences in the 80s. And I remember doing even events in the early days where I didn't use internet at all. I used to do printed flyers and put them on notice boards and
Right.
deliver
I
them to
remember
shops
those
and
days.
stuff. I was still doing that in the early noughties. Um, it actually worked just as well at the time, to be honest, but it also felt more authentic. Now you put something out on the internet and you don't know where it goes.
Right.
Literally, I don't know who sees most of these videos. I'd love to be contacted as in the comments by every person who watches this video to say, yes, I'm a real person. I'm here. That would be great. If you've got this far in the video, please do that. We do wonder sometimes whether everyone out there watching the videos is real or not. A bit like everything else we see on the screens. And so if we put all of this into the mix in this moment, Leslie, what I'm feeling is that this is the moment where we can integrate everything that's happened without pointing the finger and blaming people. It's easy to spot the male tarantulas in our world because they're the ones who've been holding all of the power with the media. If we took the media away, we wouldn't know about stories happening on the opposite side of the planet, which may or may not be a good thing, especially if they're not actually happening and it's all just made up projections to put fear into us. I don't think this is helping humanity in general to move forwards. So I wish to concur with your intention. I ask anyone watching this to put it up as an intention into the grid that we are asking for freedom from this inverted grid, but also to thank it for all the lessons that it's given us, all of the beings that contributed to the lessons, all of those poor male tarantulas that we can sort of sympathize in one way, but also understand that they were missing the point that when you cross through the ascension point, which for them is that particular process, then you become part of the universal web of life, which is actually really exciting. You just have to be eaten first. It's not that big a deal, apparently. So we can have a little bit of fun with this, but we can also understand how this fall happened and how it's been manipulated, particularly by perhaps wiser, older beings like fallen reptiles, serpents, dragons, fallen angels. And we can understand through what you've shared today, I can see everything in those files is contained here in the story of the arthropods and even the big denizens of the underworld who are deep in that series of files or whatever they are actually some of these characters. So I think, Leslie, that this is absolutely on point. I think that we can understand how we got to where we are now. I think that within duality, we can accept it and surrender to. It's like, okay, yes, we've all been affected by this in lots of ways, and we didn't even go into some of the worst of what they've done, but we know about them. And if you don't know, they're in the file, so you can get the information there if you want, but I wouldn't bother. And we can say enough. We understand why we went through these initiations. We had to also integrate, remember, Tone 8, we had to integrate that aspect of us, the fallen arthropod. Now, we've talked about this many times before as an actual dynamic process, and it's not easy integrating the arthropod. When I did it with myself, I had to speak to that part of me, which I realized had been fully rejected. I did not like the fact that a part of me was a grey, for sure. I just couldn't get on board with that idea. So, in order to countenance not just the greys, but the other insects and various other fallen beings, I asked Spirit to show me the positive aspects of those beings, the positive aspect of that part of myself. And so it did. And I was like, wow. Oh, wow. So
What
all
did
of
you
these things that
find?
I can do really well are because of my arthropod side. And they said, yes. That's why you can process information so fast compared to lots of people. It's why you can come to conclusions super quick because you've got a quantum Pentium processor built into your brain or something like that. And I was like, well, okay. So I invite everyone to do the same because actually, when you realize the benefits of the arthropods, their amazing eyesight, amazing hearing, and many other things, their amazing ability to deal with data, we contain all of that. And when we think about that, that means that we have the cosmic human version of our own, potentially, I don't like AI, but of our own version of that installed within us. And that's down to the arthropods. So I think that we have a lot to thank them for because they are the systems managers of our inner quantum technology with all of the components of magic and stuff from the snakes and the geomancy from the dragons and the heart from the bears and the healing from the dolphins and everything else that the Stellar Nations gives us. I feel the arthropods have been given quite a rough ride. They've given me quite a rough ride, but in the
Mhm.
process of the integration, I feel much better with my own inner arthropod. So I share that just as a personal experience, and that's how I came to terms with my own inner fallen arthropod.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you know
Yeah.
that story already, Leslie, because I've shared it with you before, but I
Mhm.
share it again because at this point, all of the fallen stellar nations that we have been at some point. We're still carrying, the past is still very resonant in the present and, of course, into the future too. And in this moment, we're being invited, I feel, by the arthropods, not just to integrate that part of our DNA, but all parts of the DNA, because when we do, that's when we become cosmic humans, which is why we're here. So, yeah.
Exactly. And then we can
And
call
the
on
great
our other
felines
parts.
too, of course. Yeah.
Well, she's into this one now. She's bugging me.
Right. Yeah, I
But
heard the call.
so in 2024 we had the dragons and the great felines have been healed and been that entered in galactically
I
of all
felt
their
it.
wounds.
Yeah.
And then we've been receiving that energy to integrate it in ourselves. But a part of the healing of the dragons is who stand up for divine will is to use the things that come at us as challenges, not like, oh, I gotta kill you, but like, oh, oh, how can I make myself better by that challenge?
Yes.
And really, so this is where we start to become, we're calling on cosmic human. This is actually the year of the cosmic human energy coming in, where we're asked to, actualize and rise all of it. But one of the charges to the cosmic human is that we need to balance and integrate all the 13 parts of ourselves, and
Yeah.
they can help each other. So, you know, I don't know,
Well,
it's
it's
an
what we're
inner
doing here
process.
with this series, Leslie. We're inviting
Yeah,
people to journey through the 13 tones of creation that we, in our world, call the Navigation Guide to Quantum Consciousness, but are the 13 tones of the dream spell of the Mayan, high Mayan system. And when you start at the magnetic tone and you work your way through to the 13th cosmic tone, that's it. Everything that you need is contained within there. And the more that you integrate each of the tones, whether it's through the moons, the totem animals, or the stellar nations, or the trees, or all of them, if you can manage that, that's how we integrate the understanding. But it requires dedication, focus, and discipline to the task, as all things do that are
right.
important. And
But
yeah,
that is how we earn the ability to become co-creators.
yes, it
We
is.
can't be co-creators without with all those shadows there.
No,
We're cleaning the shadows rising above. That's literally coming into a consciousness that has kind of mastered the polarities, has used them for the growth, like the dragons have now done and are showing us. And look, they're standing up for divine will. And I really think that that's even part of this initiation I'm talking here about too.
yeah,
We've really got to we're renegotiating our understanding with free will and divine will. And those are bigger conversations, but there's just so much going on. And a lot of it is about feeling our way through it with a certain kind of trust and a certain kind of surrender. Not, what I love? Like, let's give an example of that you're now creating the sacred book of nature with a story coming through and people are joining in. And it's like there's a seeker who's going after something. So there's a wonderful prototype. But we've got the world of the false matrix where people are playing video games, right? Getting into virtual realities. And it's fun because it's a mimic of the truth of what can really be in the organic matrix, which is being created in the sacred book of nature, where people are rising up and the voices are just coming in from inside and they're adding pieces
yeah,
from their knowledge and their memories and
yeah,
it's all coming together. So I feel like we're making and I'm referring to something maybe the audience won't all know, but
yeah.
the work that you're doing now with the sacred book of nature, it's like I don't even know how to say it. You're making a video game, but not. You're making
Right.
something, organic from the inside out as opposed from the outside in. And I
Yeah.
think we're really being asked to go from the inside out now.
Indeed, and thank you for saying that, Leslie. Yes, if you haven't checked out the Sacred Book of Nature, this is the star soul activation process that the Ascended Master Zach alluded to just a short while before Christmas. This is the process, learning how to channel our inner avatar selves, which of course is where the archetypes of the stellar nations come in handy. If you know your dragon, you know your snake, and all of those parts of yourself, it's a lot easier to understand when you start to channel them because actually we channel all of these parts of ourselves all of the time. But most of the time, it comes out a jumbled mess because we don't know who's talking. And so that's when things can get a bit out of control. But with that in mind, Leslie, I want to thank you for today's wonderful presentation, completely on point. And just remember that all of the shadow density is fuel. It's fuel for our spiritual uplift. So we've also got to thank
Exactly.
the mafia bosses and all of the denizens of the underworld for providing that fuel. All we have to do is turn it into liquidity, alchemize it, and we are ready for takeoff, which I feel is pretty
Yeah,
much where we are even today as we were recording this.
right. I feel like we're all called to really reignite the inner spark, the light that we
Yes,
are and have.
the
And
eternal
if you think
flame.
of something trying to ignite, and then, oh, the fire's starting, but I need some fuel. Every shadow that comes along is fuel.
Yes,
Throw it in there and watch the blaze come up. I mean, I
yes.
find that I have to work with a lot of metaphors these days. That's why I
Mhm.
like even the Stellar Nations. It's all a metaphor about energy patterns, but
Yes.
um, working with pictures is, yeah, it's a little more organic somehow. They come in from the natural world.
Right, exactly. And I think if I can say anything so far into the process of 2026, that New Earth is all based on the stories within us. And those stories are absolutely mind-blowingly amazing because they're our soul stories. And all that our soul wants us to do is to remember the song of our soul. And that is the invitation that I've accepted for myself. And I hope that everybody else does, because I think that's how we start on this day of the cosmic mirror, on the 13th day of the White World Bridge away spell with the World Bridger herself. We are now putting this into the ethers as part of our world bridging exercise. Can we integrate everything that has gone before from all aspects of our galactic selves? And most of all, those spiders, it is a difficult initiation to take Mother Spider on your back without getting the EBGBs. That was my version of Leslie's story. I did that in a journey once, and it was uncomfortable. But once it had been done, I felt her come through me, and then she was in front of me, and she was spinning a web, showing me the way that I needed to go.
And that's exactly what happened with Bayanonico. We don't realize we have a sort of an innate, you know, we have,
Repulsion, literally a repulsion.
yeah. And she said to them, "Can you accept me like you would accept a beautiful angel?" And you know what? She is absolutely, I have
Yes.
absolutely fallen in love. I mean,
A
oh my God, her
personification of the
heart.
high goddess in all of her wisdom is Grandmother Spider, and I love
Yeah,
her for the same reasons, and I work with her a lot. So
yeah. So
thank you so
thank
much,
you.
Leslie. Yeah, thank you. As always, I will put in the show notes where you can find Leslie with one or two other links there that she usually sends me. And of course, we will be back in just a few weeks for the ninth moon of intention, which it feels like a biggie. So I'm curious to see who Leslie comes through with that. In the meantime, there will be other material coming through on the YouTube platform. If you have got this far in the video, well done. You will get not a golden web because I don't think there's a version of that, but we will put a web in your comment if you decide to comment. So thank you,
Yeah.
everybody. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Sister Leslie, as always, for bringing this information through. The intentions are there. Let's go with this, everybody. This is an important moment, and I think what our sister has shared is absolutely not just important, but pivotal in this moment. So God bless everybody. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, one and all, in Lakesh, and we'll see you all again very soon. Bye for
Thank
now.
you. Bye bye.